And joining me now is Manny Alicandro, running under the Better Leaders party line for public advocate. He's an attorney and recently sought the Republican nomination for state attorney general. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, before we get into your pitch for your public advocate campaign, a little bit about your background, your resume, your accomplishments. What do you want to share with voters?
Sure, absolutely. I ran for New York State Attorney General last year, and a lot of the same reasons why I'm running now I ran last year, in terms of just being fed up with what's going on in Albany, and I'm fed up for what's going on in New York City. I'm an attorney. I practice in capital markets, regulation and compliance. My whole career worked around Wall Street, so I really have a good grasp of checks and balances and controls. And I think that lends a great aspect to being the public advocate.
And so, does it make sense to you that we should have someone in the public advocate's office who does come from the opposing political party of the mayor? And at this point, based on the last couple mayoral elections, it doesn't look like Republicans have a great shot of picking off that big seat. But public advocate, wide open field, is that part of your pitch? Absolutely.
I think we do need checks and balances, and New York clearly is, New York City and state, unfortunately, is a one-party system. And I feel that everybody who's running, respectfully, will just be a rubber stamp to the mayor because they have relationships, and they've had long-standing relationships. So I'm struggling with people who, particularly are in the city council, who've never stood up to the mayor, who now claim during the forums that I've been involved in, they are going to, when they raise their hand to be sworn as public advocate, they will stop the mayor. I find it hard to believe.
And who are you trying to appeal to in this race? I mean, are there some people when they hear, okay, he's a registered Republican, maybe some Republicans in the city will vote for him, but there's also moderate Democrats. And do you have a pitch even to folks who are more on the progressive end, or is your path to victory more, I got to get Republicans to come out and vote for me, and then I have a shot in this race?
Sure. I'm really pitching to New York City writ large, right? I am looking for people who are just fed up with the dysfunction. So yes, I'm a Republican, yes, I'm pro-Trump, but when I say that, I'm talking about someone who wants to work with the federal government. So if you look at what's going on with NYCHA, HUD is involved now. There's federal involvement with HUD. I think it's important to have a strong relationship with the federal government and not be at war with the federal government. If you look at what's going on in Queens, we had a rally in Queens yesterday on Sunday because of the execution, the gangland-style execution of an 18th Street gang member by an MS-13 gang member. Right?
On the subway platform.
On the subway platform, on the 7 train. And the reason that we had the rally was because there is a sanctuary city policy being pushed by Mayor de Blasio to force, or to prevent, I should say, communication between ICE and NYPD. So this individual that actually was apprehended who murdered the opposing gang member, he had a record. Unfortunately, that information was not shared with ICE. So these are the kinds of issues that I'm really focusing on, which to me cross party lines.
Okay, so let's take that further. You're saying, the city's not being run well. Talk a little bit more about that. What are some of the issues where you're elected public advocate, February 27th, you come into office after the election on the 26th. What are you focused on? What are you calling out the mayor on? What are you issuing reports on?
Absolutely. So NYCHA housing, major issue. Everybody's talking about NYCHA housing. My take on it's a bit different. My take on it is I'm really looking in terms of who was responsible for this negligence. I'm looking at potentially, can we move forward with criminal prosecutions, right? If this property was owned by private landlords, people literally would, I think, would be convicted with criminal prosecutions. This is gross negligence. I just read a report today that there's lead in water. And again, the city debates the amount of lead. It's not for the city to determine how much lead is appropriate or not. The city are not scientists, they're not chemists. And I'm struggling with the fact that the city's been able to get away with this dereliction of responsibility to people who live in NYCHA housing, brown water, lead paint, now lead in the water, no heat, rodent infestations, actually horrible situations that are incorrigible that don't seem to stop. I had heard something, which is really interesting, that a judge who was responsible for the $2.2 billion settlement with HUD was reluctant to release monies to NYCHA until the actual agreement was signed with HUD, because the judge was worried that funds would be absconded if those funds went into NYCHA without the federal monitor stepping up. So that's one situation, and I would clearly work on and fix.
Quick question on NYCHA before we move on to another. Do you believe that the federal government should be putting up more money? NYCHA's got $30+ billion of physical needs. Is the federal government responsible for kicking in additional funding?
I think the federal government should put more money in, but really be responsible for that money in terms of allocation of it. I'm concerned. I'm not sure where that money goes, right? So you'll see a common theme in my campaign is about roles and responsibilities. I don't know who runs NYCHA. I don't know what their responsibilities are. I don't know what their experience is. And now we have new leadership at NYCHA. I'm not sure it's the best leadership. Again, it's political cronyism, people who are friends of the mayor running these agencies when there's a dereliction of duty. So I'm open to increased funding, but if it's allocated the right way. There's also third-party contracts that I understand that happen in terms of NYCHA deals with third-party contractors. I have no idea how that process is handled, if there's competitive bidding or whatever. It just seems to be a lack of knowledge. So I would conduct a thorough investigation, get to the bottom of it.
Okay. So another issue, where do you think the city and the mayor are falling down?
The homeless crisis is absolutely incorrigible. It disgusts me to walk the streets. I hear about human rights violations and issues in foreign countries by the United Nations, and I literally stepping over bodies. It's cold, the winter, it's horrible. It's troublesome to me that we don't even know the number of homeless people in this city. I mean, if you ask people, they actually did a census a couple of weeks ago. If you ask people, well, how many homeless people do we have in New York, people who are in the know, they come back with, well, it depends on how you define a homeless person. I mean, it's just a horrible situation. So my angle is, if you don't know how many people you need to serve, how could you come up with a budget? How could you come up with an effective plan? The worst thing we're doing right now, and this mayor is clearly doing blockbusting, he's putting homeless shelters in residential neighborhoods. There's one on 58th Street. There will be one in College Point. There's one in Sunset Park. There's one in
He's planning on opening dozens around the city.
Which is the worst resolution.
So you'd be against that. What is the resolution?
The resolution is we need to create shelters that deliver the services that are needed by the constituents in a more appropriate neighborhood where we could facilitate those services. Right now, I don't think we can facilitate those services in residential neighborhoods where there's schools, for example, where there's children. Because now what's happening is that the neighborhood where those shelters are being built is resentful towards the homeless people in that shelter. And the homeless people are not getting the services that they need. So it's a lose-lose as far as I'm concerned. I have no idea why the mayor has decided to put those shelters in those neighborhoods. My understanding is there's like a 30-day notice period required. So the city just has to provide a 30-day notification to the neighborhood. I've been to many.
For some, I don't even know if they have to give that amount, depending on what the building's been used at. But that's
and what happens essentially is that the neighborhood has to create a coalition, and there are no governmental actors. There's nobody that I'm aware of that is in a city council, Congress, whatever, state level official who's actually working with these coalitions, right? So they have to form a coalition on their own accord, raise money, and then retain council third party. That's absolutely silly. To fight back, come up with some type of reason why they can't move. The city can't move forward with the shelter.
You don't think the mayor's general philosophy of every neighborhood should sort of bear a little bit of this responsibility of helping people get people off the streets and into facilities? You think that's misguided because they should not be sort of housed in residential
I just don't think it makes any sense. There's no thinking of the process in terms of how are these homeless people being better served by putting them in a residential neighborhood. It absolutely makes no sense.
So let's talk about the next step on that. When people are coming out of homelessness, they need housing. The mayor has a big affordable housing plan. Many candidates, surely in the public advocate race, have a little bit to say on whether that plan is a good plan. It's too reliant on subsidies. It's not reliant enough on subsidies, depending on where you come in. There's some who believe that New York, from the state level to the city, too much regulation, too much subsidy, needs to be a more market approach. We just need a lot more housing. Where do you come in on that?
I'm kind of nuanced, kind of in the middle. I think we do need more housing, but I'm again worried about the subsidies because I feel that the city is always looking for money, and that falls on the backs of the taxpayers. And our tax base in New York City and New York State, and there's many reports on this recently, is constantly eroding, where we're losing a lot of people. And I'm concerned that these plans should be moved forward with more thought towards, what could be done to provide affordable housing in certain neighborhoods, working with developers, working with that community. I feel that there's tension between the developer community and the city, and we need to work that difference out. I think we need to come up with a better plan. Again, it's a lack of planning. A lot of what I'm saying is a lack of planning. Talking about, segueing to Amazon, for example, lack of planning, right? People in the city are upset because they don't feel, number one, that those 25,000 jobs will go to New Yorkers. people don't feel that there will be increased services. So if you have a big influx of people that are now in Long Island City that otherwise are not, what are you going to do to not make Long Island City overcrowded? Will you have more schools, will you have more roads, will you have more transportation? I would submit not. Because that's what the city does. Is if you look at all the gentrification in neighborhoods that are otherwise industrial are now residential, yet there's no additional services, right? So that, to me, is a failure in traditional urban planning and thinking that through.
So, in favor of Amazon coming to the city with all those jobs?
I'm not. I'm
okay.
against Amazon.
Okay.
I'm against
and
Amazon.
why is that?
Because I just don't, I don't think those jobs will go to New Yorkers, of the 25,000 jobs. I think a lot of the jobs will probably be outsourced and people will move into New York City. Secondly, as we were talking about with NYCHA, and then we're talking about housing with subsidies, if the city could find $3 billion to pay Amazon, I mean, those are expensive jobs. If you do the math, $3 billion for 25,000 jobs, that's very expensive. So I'm clearly for jobs. I'm clearly pro-job, and I would want to do what we could do in the economy in New York City to create more jobs, but I don't think we need to bail out the richest guy in the world. I just think it's kind of narrow-minded. I think maybe it'd be better suited if it went into a different place up in New York State, maybe Buffalo or someplace up northwest.
If Amazon's willing to go,
If Amazon's willing to go, yeah.
And so one of the other biggest issues, and you just touched on it a little bit, that people are talking about, of course, a lot, is transit. The MTA has had many issues really become acute over the last few years. We've seen the governor declare a state of emergency. We've seen extra money. The new MTA, New York City Transit president, Andy Byford, comes in with a plan that needs to be funded. Are there things as public advocate you would say, here's what I'm going to do on transit, or at least what I'm going to try to hold people's feet to the fire on?
Great question. I'm struggling with the MTA every day, as we all are, and I'm concerned about congestion pricing, right? So what I'm concerned about is the fact that people in the city have learned to survive, and when you come to New York, and people who either grew up here or moved to New York from someplace else, it's a survival game, okay? And certain people are not comfortable taking the subway, and that's their choice. And if they want to take Uber, Lyft, whatever, via, that's their prerogative and their choice. I don't think we should punish those people with congestion pricing. What'll happen? Well, that money will be flushed into the MTA, potentially $1 million a day. Do we know what the bottom line of the MTA is? Again, similar themes, MTA, NYCHA, homelessness in terms of Division of Homeless Services. Who's running these agencies? What are their roles and responsibilities? How do we hold these people accountable? I feel like the MTA is just a cesspool, and it's a disaster. We'll never get to the bottom of it unless and until we have someone like me become public advocate and get a seat at the table. I want to see budgets. I want to know why we're wasting money. I want to know why we can repair the L train on a much more expedited basis, but no others line.
Allegedly, yeah.
Allegedly,
we'll see,
but there seems to be this urgency to serve the constituents that live in Brooklyn, which is great. But I would love to see the same kind of expediency to people who live in Washington Heights, to people who take the 7 train in Flushing. And those trains are very delayed, they're very slow, they're very overcrowded. So I have a big problem with bailing out the MTA.
Let me come back to congestion pricing for a second. It depends who you are. Some people say the revenue is really what we need. Others say we got to do something about the traffic and the congestion, and congestion pricing not only gets you revenue, yes, people are very concerned about, is that money just going into the black hole of the MTA? But what about the congestion issue? Do you not see some validity there? We have to figure out ways to reduce the number of cars coming into the central Manhattan business.
I agree, but the trade-off is we have to understand why there's so many cars. There's so many cars because people don't want to use mass transportation. If you look at trying to go from east side to west side, crosstown is impossible. The crosstown buses, our buses are the slowest buses in the country. The only way to go crosstown by train is to take the L train. There's no other way to go across town. So you either walk or you take a taxi. And if you look at the city too with taxis, I mean, by having more cars on the street in terms of Uber, I mean, what happened to New York City taxis right now? I mean, how's the city doing anything? There's a bunch of people who drive taxis who are really good people and need to earn a living, and now they're being squeezed out too. So that's even troublesome too to me, the way that the city is allowing Uber and Lyft and Via to move forward at the expense of taxi drivers.
So in our final minute here, you and Eric Ulrich, a city council member from Queens, are the only 2 registered Republicans in this race, and it's not a party race. We said already that everybody has their own ballot line, but to have a path to victory, one of you needs to try to pull as many of the Republican voters as possible from the race. So how do you differentiate yourself from Councilmember Ulrich?
So I know Eric very well. He's a very good guy. He's a very good councilman. I have a different point of view. So I'm more traditionalist Republican. As I mentioned earlier, I'm pro-Trump. I support the president, and he's gone on record that he is not, and he does not. So I have a clear line of demarcation there in terms of I'm someone that would identify more with the Republican and the Conservative Party, where to me he is really has different values and kind of a different point of view. Mm-hmm. So people who are looking in New York City to vote for someone who is more traditionalist Republican, they should vote for me. I mean, and that's really why I'm in a race, is because people came to me and said, "We really need you to jump into the race." Now you look at the race
to represent that perspective,
to represent that pocket, and there's a decent pocket. So if you look at the race, there's so many of us running that I just need a clear lane, and I think I have that lane. And if you look at the fact that Trump got like 30% in 2016 in New York, well, that's not much in a one-on-one. But if that's split among so many candidates, there's a clear lane for me. There's a lot of pockets in New York City that are very supportive of Trump. Sure. I met a lot of people, particularly in the Russian-speaking communities in Brooklyn, when I got my signatures to get on the ballot, that were very supportive of my candidacy. And they're very passionate about the president.
And lastly, to the very sizable portion of the New York electorate who's anti-Trump,
right,
what is your outgoing message to them in terms of giving you a shot, or do you think you probably don't have any chance with those folks?
I think I do. I mean, I really want to affect change. I'm running because I love the city. I grew up here. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I really want to affect change. I don't think the one-party system, as you mentioned earlier, is correct. I think we need someone who won't be a rubber stamp to the mayor. Someone will stand up to the mayor. Again, we need checks and balances, and I think I have the background, the education, experience to do that. And I think at the end of the day, yes, I'm Republican and I'm pro-Trump, but at the end of the day, that's not only me. You can't identify me just as that. I'm someone who's very detail-oriented. I'm a fighter, I'm an attorney, and I'm passionate about really fighting for New Yorkers. And I feel that when I go out there and meet people, a lot of voices are not being listened to and not being heard.
So we could continue down that road for a while, but we're out of time. Manny, Alicandro, thanks very much for being here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.